Lovecraft's stories were never meant for the screen. There are no heroes, no witty dialogue, no comforting resolutions, just the slow realization that humanity means nothing at all. Translating that to film is nearly impossible, but every so often, a director comes close, capturing that same suffocating dread, that same sense of something vast and incomprehensible, brushing against the edges of reality. These are the 5 films that did it best, the ones that actually got it right. At Miskatonic University, Dr. Henry Armitage gives a courteous academic lecture about the Necronomicon. As if you can shelve terror between theology and folklore, he shows the book like a trophy, leather, clasps, the hushed awe of forbidden pages, then hands it off to his assistant, Nancy, to return to the vault. That's when Wilbur Whately appears, polite, overly careful with his words, eyes like a locked attic. He doesn't demand to borrow the book. He asks, soft voice, almost grateful. Nancy agrees, and in a gesture that feels both foolish and inevitable, she follows him home to Dunwich, that coastal nowhere that smells like damp wood and old scandal. The farmhouse is wrong in the way neglected places are wrong, the wallpaper too stained to be random, the doors that seem to breathe, that feeling that a stairwell has been listening. Nancy senses it, but it's not a haunted house movie, not really. It's a ritual movie. The book wasn't a souvenir, it was the last stubborn piece of a family project that should never ever have been started. An entire town arranged like a sigil, waiting for someone to finish the sentence. What makes the Dunwich Horror work is its refusal to over-explain. It hints and withholds, keeps its monstrosities mostly off-screen, and lets the dread pool in the corners. The camera lingers on faces, on rooms that feel slightly mismeasured, on the countryside that looks normal until you stare for too long. Is it dated? Sure. A little TV movie at times, but pay attention to the tone. That creeping, suffocating suspicion that somewhere very close by, a door is opening inward. Few films understand Lovecraft's equation this well. Curiosity plus lineage plus the wrong book equals calamity. And if for some reason you've only seen the 2009 remake, I recommend you cleanse your palate and watch the original 1970 version in all its glory. Dan Kane is a good student with a normal heartbeat. He wants to be a doctor, he wants to save people, and he wants, mostly, to live a decent life. Then Herbert West moves in next door with his little box of syringes, and a theory that death is a mistimed chemical event. Herbert doesn't sneer at the universe, he corrects it. Re-Animator shouldn't work as a Lovecraft adaptation, and that's partly why it's perfect. Lovecraft disliked the original serialized story, Herbert West, Re-Animator, calling it hacky, repetitive, too beholden to cliffhangers. Director Stuart Gordon keeps the bone structure, the rivalry, the serum, the hubris, but electrifies the corpse. The result is delirious. Equal parts surgery and slapstick, gore that is so tactile you can practically feel the latex, and a tone that whip cracks between satire and nightmare. Here's the trick. Underneath the arterial spray and the gallows humor, the ethic is pure Lovecraft. West treats mortality like a lab error. He's not curing death, he's arguing with it, insisting on a universe that must obey his will. And because this is Lovecraft's neighborhood, the universe doesn't argue back. It demonstrates. The resurrected don't return grateful. They come back wrong, feral, confused, personal boundaries boiled off. West keeps insisting the method is sound. He'll adjust the dose, change the timing, recalibrate the dream. Meanwhile, the morgue turns into a courtroom, and the bodies deliver the verdict. You can enjoy Re-Animator as a midnight movie riot. The fluorescent serum, the outrageous set pieces, the infamous scene with Dr. Hill that horror fans still whisper about. But beneath the spectacle is Lovecraft's oldest warning. The tools aren't the problem, the user is. West is brilliant, industrious, and absolutely certain. In Lovecraft, certainty is the most dangerous drug of all. In a private laboratory, Dr. Pretorius and Dr. Tillinghast build a machine called the Resonator, an array of tuning forks and humming hardware that promises to nudge human senses just a little wider. Not to heaven, not to hell, just over. One click to the right on the spectrum we can't see. They switch it on, reality blossoms like a bruise. Lovecraft's original story, written in 1920, is barely a handful of pages. 2 men, 1 machine, and a very bad outcome. Stuart Gordon takes that seed and grows a hothouse of psychosexual body horror. The Resonator doesn't just reveal creatures we can't normally perceive. It alters the people looking. Pretorius doesn't vanish so much as change address, leaving behind a version of himself that's all appetite. Tillinghast stumbles out of the initial experiment raving, eyes beggared with things he wishes he hadn't learned, and gets thrown into an asylum until a psychiatrist and a skeptical cop decide to recreate the conditions. Because of course they do. The brilliance of From Beyond is that it understands Lovecraft's terror isn't only cosmic, It's intimate. Knowledge isn't neutral. It rearranges you. The film externalizes that in glistening biological imagery. Skin that shivers for no reason, bone that grows where it shouldn't, faces that look like they've been sculpted by a hand that doesn't quite remember the recipe for human. Purists sometimes knock its faithfulness, but fidelity to plot isn't the point. Curiosity as compulsion, discovery as disfigurement. Once your antennae are up, the world doesn't go back to normal. Normal goes back to you. A monastery on a cliff, the sea grinding its teeth below. In its library, beneath locks and liturgies, sits a book, not just a prop in a mythos, but the axis it spins on. Into this quiet storm walks a thin, sharp man with observant eyes, Howard Phillips Lovecraft. He asks to see the volume. The monks oblige. He descends to a vault that feels less like a room and more like a decision. Necronomicon frames itself around that descent. It's an anthology in 3 movements: the rats in the walls, cool air, and the whisperer in the darkness. Each different in texture but united by a single gesture. People reaching too far into a drawer labeled "Don't." The wraparound segments show Lovecraft copying passages, floorboards humming with old prayers, the air thick with the sensation that the book doesn't just contain stories. It produces them. The segments themselves are a tour through Lovecraft's favorite hallways. Rats is a tale of ancestral guilt, the past refusing to stay buried, the bloodline turning in its sleep. Cool air is clinical and tragic, a romance with refrigeration in which rationality slides into maintenance, not living, but refusing to stop. And then Whisperer, with its invasion of the mind from far, far outside, not by demons, but by indifference. The idea that intelligence is everywhere and kindness is nowhere required. Anthologies can be uneven by design, but Necronomicon feels like a stitched skin. The stitch is visible, yes, but holding. The directors approach Lovecraft with reverence and gusto, not mummifying him, but letting his ideas breathe. The imagery nods to pulp illustrations and European horror, cracked frescoes, lamplight over stone, faces lit like confessions. Even when a segment sprints past the letter of the text, it honors the law of it. That knowledge wants witnesses, not friends. By the time our writer closes the book, the vault doesn't feel like a basement anymore. It feels like underneath. Letters arrive on Albert Wilmarth's desk. Polite at first, then urgent. They come from Henry Akeley, a man aging in a house tucked into the Vermont woods, where the hills look like they've leaned in to eavesdrop. Akeley says the old legends are true. Lights on the ridgelines, voices like thunder in a language that does not care if you hear it. Wilmarth is a professor, a skeptic, a man who believes the world is what can be footnoted. Then Akeley starts sending proof, photographs, recordings, fragments that make the room seem slightly tilted. Wilmarth isn't converted. He's cornered by evidence. He boards a train to Vermont with his suitcase of rational explanations and arrives at a house that smells like pine, dust, and a decision he can't undo. Produced by the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society, this adaptation wears the aesthetic of an earlier era. The camera doesn't flinch toward spectacle, it lingers on faces that are trying very, very hard not to understand what they're seeing. When the revelations come, they come in paper, in wax cylinders, in the unhuman logic of something vast making a small, practical request. Lovecraft is often accused, sometimes fairly, of fusing vagueness with mystery. Whisperer avoids both traps. It shows just enough, not the whole creature, but the cost of knowing it. Not the entire conspiracy, but the shape of it. The brain in a canister motif, the promise of travel without a body, the idea that identity is a negotiable thing. If your interlocutor has enough patience and a sufficiently robust toolkit, all of it plays like a calm lecture given by someone whose mouth is not the part that's speaking. The tragedy here isn't bloodshed. It's rearrangement. Wilmarth goes to Vermont, a man who trusts documents. He returns a man who understands that documents aren't written for him. The cosmos doesn't tailor its truths to our comfort. It prints them at scale and lets us decide whether or not to be crushed. If you want one film that feels like reading Lovecraft by oil lamp with your back to a window, watch this. Lovecraft's horrors were never about monsters. They were about realization that everything we fear isn't watching us, because it doesn't have to. Adapting that kind of fear is nearly impossible, but these 5 films came closer than most ever will. They remind us that true terror isn't about survival, it's about insignificance. If you enjoyed this descent into the strange and forbidden, subscribe to Silver Shivers for more journeys into the unsettling corners of cinema. Because the best horror, it doesn't just scare you, it rewires the way you see the world.